In this video, we're going to have a relatively brief overview of quite a few different philosophical approaches to the mind-body problem. Okay, so what we've got here is the first row of a table, which I'll describe to you. And what we have on the left is the general class of approach. And so we're going to look at monism and dualism. So the approaches that fall under monism assume that there is only one type of stuff in the universe. Dualism, of course, thinks that there are two different types of stuff, maybe the physical and the mental. Then in the second column, we have the particular theory or the approach that we're talking about. The next two columns describe, the next three columns describe the properties of like the physical and the mental universe and the causal relationship between them, if there is any. And what I've done here is to set up columns for the pros and the cons. In this video, I'm not going to give you the pros and the cons, but this is an attempt to nudge you into considering them. Maybe when you're doing some wider reading into these, you can think about the pros and cons of each approach. So let's go through the first one, which we're calling idealism, also known as solipsism. I think I said that right. In this approach of idealism, there is no physical universe. There is only mental events. And for that reason, this is also known as mentalism, which I think is a way better term for this. It sounds cool. So in a way, this approach sounds kind of weird. Like, what are you talking about? There is no physical world. In another way, however, it kind of makes sense, because if you think about it, I definitely experience being hungry or being cold or wanting to do something. I feel emotions and desires, and I experience thoughts and so on. And so in one way, all I can really firmly say is that must be what happens, because that's directly what I experience. The physical world, I don't directly experience the physical world. I only experience the physical world through my senses. So the idea of constructivism, which you may have come across in terms of perception, is the idea that what you actually experience of the world is a constructed reality, a hypothesis or a model of the world, as opposed to directly experiencing the world as it is. And without going into this idea even further, because it sounds a bit strange, but in a way it definitely makes sense, because the existence of illusions, visual illusions or other kinds of illusions, we're going to look at these in the course. It's hard to rationalize the idea that you directly experience the world if you can have these illusory perceptions about it. And so I think that idealism, mentalism, while it initially sounds odd in our kind of scientific, physicalist-based world these days, in another way, I think that idealism and mentalism has an awful lot going for it. So it's an interesting one. The next one that we'll consider is another kind of monist theory, but rather than saying that only mental events work, physicalism is the exact opposite. It basically says there is only the physical world. So in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of mind and brain, it would say, well, the physical world is all that exists. My brain exists. It's made of tissues and neurons and salt water and molecules, proteins, atoms. And physicalism is kind of basically like the default scenario, I would say. It's the default position of an awful lot of scientists, because like I say, we exist in this very kind of physical based scientific age where people make machines, they make bridges, they make computer chips, they make satellites that do all of these things. And we're able to do these things because we have an understanding of the physical universe. And so physicalism says this is all that there is. And so that's that. I'm also going to just point out that functionalism, which is something that we're going to look at, is kind of closely aligned to this. So I'd say that functionalism is pretty much a physicalist type of approach. Some philosophers might kind of have some nuance there, but for the present sake of argument, that's what we're going to go with. Now we're going to switch into dualism, dualist theories. So very briefly, we'll take a look at classic dualism. So now we think that there are two kinds of things. There's the physical universe, but then there's also this mental world, which is somehow separate, made of fundamentally different stuff to physical stuff. But the causal direction under this approach is that the mental stuff is primary, and it then affects the world. So that might sound a bit kind of weird, but if you think about the concept of free will, we all kind of think that we make a decision, and then somehow, having made that decision, some things happen in our brain, and it goes to the motor cortex, and it makes us do something, like drink. So that's classic dualism. There's also another kind of idea called Parellism. It's still a dualist theory because it proposes there's a physical world, and also there's a kind of a mental world, a mental realm. But these don't actually have any causal connections between them. And this, I think, is a bit odd, because the problem that this has is that over time, our mental events in terms of our thoughts, feelings, sensations, decisions, and so on, kind of match up with the physical world. So if I want to say a certain thing or do a certain thing, I have mental events that correspond to that, but then this is actually enacted in the world. And so if there is no connection between the two, how is it that these things kind of line up? So to me, parallelism is a bit weird. Sounds a bit odd. I mean, it's certainly one of the options that you could consider, but to me, it's a bit of it really sinks it. Like, how on earth is this kind of weird physical universe and weird mental universe kind of synchronized? Now we'll look at Epiphenopmenalism. This is also known as the kind of the ghost in the machine idea. So here we have a physical universe So we have our brain and our body, and we also have mental events. But under Epiphenopmenalism, the physical universe is the primary driver, if you like. And you could consider the mind or the mental experience as being secondary. So the term epiphenomena is almost like it essentially means that the mental experiences emerge or are a byproduct of stuff happening in the physical universe. And so the physical events here is where everything is, and the mental events are just a mere byproduct. This is very interesting kind of idea. It suggests that we don't necessarily have free will, and that, again, this is I would say relatively popular because we live in this kind of modern deterministic kind of worldview where, I mean, if we think back to the beginning of the solar system, there was basically a bunch of dust floating around in space, and it all slowly moved together under gravity. And fast forward over time, we get the formation of the sun and the planets, and things happened, and now we have humans with brains. And so at what point in that timeline of dust in space to people sitting watching a video, at what point did mental stuff happen? When did that appear? So epiphenopmenalism really is kind of saying that the physical universe is primary, but somehow there's something about the complicated arrangement of matter, the complicated set of events that happen in the brain, which gives rise to this new phenomena of mental experience. The other one is essentially a kind of a mix of classic dualism and epiphenopmenalism. And so now that it's saying that, yes, we have this physical universe, we have this kind of mental universe, and they basically interact. So yeah, we can have our deterministic physical universe, which gives rise to certain events happening, and we observe and reflect upon them. But it also says that somehow in our mental experience we can make decisions, and somehow something in the mental universe interacts somehow with something in the brain to make a series of events happen that you decided. And so this is a mixture. So people kind of like this. A question, though, is how does this happen? We have done a very good job of understanding the physical universe. Kind of physicists have done a very good job. But we don't really have a very good handle at all, at least I don't think we do, on what kind of mental experience is, what it's made of. And because of that, we certainly don't have any idea about how this kind of weird mind stuff interacts with physical stuff. So I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but just that currently we don't really have much of a clue about how that works. So that was my brief overview of different philosophical approaches to the mind-body problem.